Open your mouth, dearest. These are as sweet as you are. I live only to serve your pleasure, Empress." The words were spoken in the velvet hush of the Palatine Hill, the heart of an empire, but they were hollow. The year is 48 AD. It is midnight. The city that ruled the world is not silent. It hums with the low, restless growl of a million souls, a growl of ambition, of fear, and of insatiable hunger. Rome, a metropolis of shining white marble and columns of gold, a place where philosophy was debated, law was forged, and the fate of continents was decided. But beneath this glorious veneer, under the shadow of the mighty Pantheon and the Forum, lies another Rome. This is the Rome of the Subura, the notorious slum district, a labyrinth where the streets run thick with wine, stale sweat, and the dangerous friction of secrets. It is here, through the unsuspecting warped door of a low-grade brothel, that a solitary figure enters, a woman cloaked entirely in dark fabric. Her face is an enigma, her walk deliberate, almost military, and her purpose is unspoken, yet clearly immense. The madam, a seasoned veteran of the city's darkest appetites, looks up. Her startlement lasts only a fraction of a second before it melts into a knowing, wicked smile. This visitor is not a mistake. The woman slowly lowers her hood, and the room, dense with the scent of cheap incense and stale wine, seems to hold its collective breath. Beneath the cloak, she wears the cheapest disguise, a poorly dyed blonde wig, the kind favored by the desperate street girls. Her cheeks are dusted with excessive rouge, and her wrists are adorned with sparkling, undeniable fake gold. To anyone who mattered, a slave, a gambler, a soldier, she was just another courtesan. Lucius, seeking one last coin before the sun rose, but she is not. She is Valeria Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius, Empress of Rome, mother of his children, and, quite simply, the most powerful and feared woman in the entire known world. Her presence here is not an accident. It is a profound declaration. To understand the descent into this brothel, we must first understand the height from which she fell. Messalina was born into the very highest echelon of Roman nobility. She was the great-grandniece of the divine Augustus, a descendant of the imperial bloodline itself. Power was not sought, it was her inheritance, and when she married Claudius, she was barely 20, radiant, stunning, and dangerously intelligent. Claudius was 47. He was awkward, a man known for his stammer, considered by the court to be bookish, timid, and even half-witted. He had spent his life as the butt of family jokes, the scholar who hid from the world. Then, in 41 AD, the mad Emperor Caligula was murdered, and amidst the chaos, Claudius, found trembling behind a curtain, was hailed as the unexpected, accidental emperor. Overnight, Messalina went from noblewoman to a near. She was 23, and entire provinces existed purely to serve her. She grasped a profound truth. Her husband might wear the crown, but she wielded the power. The historian Tacitus, writing 50 years later, summarized her gift in a single, chilling sentence. Messalina, seeing her husband's weakness, understood that she possessed what he lacked, the power to rule through desire. But desire, like power, is an insatiable appetite, and for Messalina, this addiction quickly morphed into a profound, terrifying hunger. In the marble halls of the Palatine, surrounded by wealth beyond imagining, she experienced a deep, suffocating emptiness. What could she not have? Jewels, estates, slaves, senators, all hers. She could command death with a gesture. Yet, the palace became a cage of gold. The emperor was her bored, oblivious husband, and Rome itself felt like a playground that no longer offered any novel challenge. Narrator: it is often said that those who possess everything often seek the one thing they cannot or should not have. Danger. Her transgressions began quietly, an affair with a poet here, a senator there. Those who dared confront her simply vanished. But soon, The whispers reached the street. The Empress was not content with mere lovers. She craved something else, a feeling that could make her heart pound and remind her of her own mortality. This is how she began her ritual, sneaking out of the palace night after night, bribing her carriage driver into utter silence, dropping off blocks away from her chosen destination. There, under the sacred cover of darkness, Messalina became like Iska, the common prostitute, the satirist juvenile, writing a generation later, could barely process the audacity. The Empress herself, wearing her knighthood, entered the brothel with its stench of old sheets. She took her cell, stripped, and offered herself for sale under the false name Lakiska. This wasn't simply pleasure-seeking. It was a ritual of conquest. Each night, she pushed her limits further. Rome was obsessed with competition. Gladiators bled for victory. Charioteers risked death for glory. Messalina joined their ranks, but in her own grotesque, internal arena. Narrator: And then came the night that would forever cement her infamous legacy. The night of the competition. Scylla, the city's most renowned and enduring courtesan, had heard the rumors of the mysterious noblewoman challenging the very pride of the Subura. Perhaps Scylla believed it was a joke. Perhaps she was simply too proud to refuse. She accepted the wager. The rules were brutally simple. Who could service and endure more clients before the first light of dawn? The madam, intrigued and deeply amused, agreed to be the impartial counter. The night outside began like any other in the Subura. Drunken laughter, the thick air of incense, and primal lust. Inside the brothel, the contest unfolded in a silence broken only by murmurs, footsteps, and the rhythmic creak of wooden doors. Narrator: The number is recorded by Pliny, the Elder, with almost clinical, cold precision, in his Natural History. The final count: 25 men before the Empress of Rome, one after another, until the dawn's pale light began to stain the sky over the Tiber. When it was finally over, Messalina reportedly stood, visibly trembling, but with a triumphant, undeniable smile. The madam marked the final count on a wax tablet. Scylla, utterly spent, conceded defeat. The Empress had won. She left through the side door as quietly as she arrived, her fake wig askew, the costly scent of her original perfume now inextricably mixed with the cheap odors of the room. Outside, Rome slept peacefully. By sunrise, she was back in the sanctity of the palace, washing away the night in rose-scented oils, her body's servants utterly unaware. By the time Claudius woke, she would be seated beside him at breakfast, smiling sweetly, her demeanor serene, as if nothing had ever happened. Yet, in the private darkness of her chamber, she felt a profound, savage satisfaction. It was not sexual fulfillment. It was imperial conquest. She had dominated an arena no man, not even her emperor husband, could ever claim. Even in her utter degradation, she had ruled supreme. Narrator: But what kind of victory was this? Historians have wrestled with this question for 2 millennia. Was Messalina merely depraved, or was she truly desperate? A predator, or a prisoner, trapped by her unique circumstance? Modern scholars suggest a deeper layer that the ancients missed. In a world where women, even were granted power through their bloodline and beauty, but denied true agency, the right to act independently, Messalina's defiance reads almost like a twisted, tragic rebellion, a grotesque act against the limited, silent role she was forced to play in a male-dominated empire. It was an attempt to prove she could conquer men themselves, even in their most primal. But make no mistake, her twisted games carried consequences. Her secret nights could not remain secret forever. The whispers began with servants, then crept to the powerful freedmen, and finally, to the gossip of the senators. Narrator: Claudius, her husband, appeared entirely oblivious. Or, perhaps, he simply chose not to know. There is a chilling line in the history of Cassius Dio, The emperor did not see, or seeing pretended blindness, for fear of losing what peace he had. The brothel was only the beginning. Her ambition, once unleashed, grew exponentially. She discovered that her beauty, her most primal and powerful weapon, could destroy faster and more effectively than any sword. She began to use seduction as a calculated form of political conquest. Senators, generals, aristocrats all fell beneath her intense, demanding gaze. Those who yielded to her desires were rewarded with sudden power. Those who resisted met swift, total ruin. She used her lovers like pawns on a chessboard, their downfalls serving as her cruel entertainment. No rumor about her was too wild, no accusation too dangerous. A single, soft whisper from the Empress could instantly end a career or a life. Narrator, by 48 AD, her political appetite had outgrown mere bodies and titles. It had fastened onto the throne itself. Messalina began to imagine a new reality where Claudius was gone, and she reigned beside a younger, stronger man. That man was Gaius Silius, the most handsome, eloquent, and daring senator in Rome. He was everything Claudius was not: confident, magnetic, and recklessly ambitious. Tacitus suggests that Messalina seduced him easily, not merely for pleasure, but because she saw him as the key to a new beginning, partner in a truly powerful reign. Silius, dazzled by the Empress, allowed himself to believe they could rule together. The affair was no secret among Rome's elite, but no one dared speak openly. Who would accuse an empress whose enemies mysteriously ceased to exist? Then came an act of breathtaking, unbelievable audacity that no one could have predicted. While Claudius was away at the port city of Ostia, inspecting grain shipments, Messalina staged a public act that shook the foundations of the empire. She married Gaius, not in secret, not behind closed doors, but in a full, elaborate, public ceremony. There were witnesses, priests, musicians, and members of the Senate stood frozen, utterly unable to process the sheer magnitude of the treason they were witnessing. Some whispered the Empress had finally lost her mind. Others were certain it was a full-blown coup attempt. Messalina, radiant in her bridal veil, smiled as if she were simply rewriting history in real time. Narrator, Tacitus captured the scene's madness with chilling clarity. In a city where nothing escaped notice, they celebrated marriage openly, as if the empire itself would permit such an outrage. But the empire had limits, and Messalina's enemies had waited too long. Among the freedmen who administered Claudius's government, men like Narcissus and Pallas were individuals who owed their power not to birth, but to cunning and ruthlessness. Messalina had mocked them and undermined them. The mock wedding was their chance. When word reached Ostia, the freedmen rushed to Claudius with the impossible news. His wife, the Empress, had married another man. Claudius, confused, first dismissed it as a preposterous rumor, but when they showed him the evidence, the marriage contract, the witnesses, the blood drained from the emperor's face. "Am I still emperor?" he whispered, shaken. "Is Silius still a private citizen?" Narrator, the answer to both questions was technically yes, but Claudius's world had already shattered. In Rome, chaos erupted. Silius, finally realizing the enormity of his folly, urged Messalina to seize power immediately. But the Empress, trapped in her own delusion of invincibility, hesitated. Her hesitation doomed them both. Narcissus moved with brutal speed. He ordered the Praetorian Guard to arrest Silius and every ally involved in the wedding. Silius was executed before sunset, his body displayed as a stark, bloody warning. Messalina, still believing she could manipulate her way out, fled to the beautiful gardens of Luc. She sent frantic pleas to Claudius, convinced that if she could only look into his eyes, he would forgive her, as he always had. But the powerful freedmen made absolutely certain that meeting would never happen. They feared her voice more than they feared any dagger. They knew Claudius's weakness. If Messalina reached him, she would live, and they would die, Narcissus convinced the emperor that mercy would be his own undoing. If she lives, he warned, she will rise again, and you will surely fall. The order was quietly given. Narrator. In the lush gardens, Messalina sat beside her mother, Lepida, a stern woman who had long disapproved of her daughter's excesses. Tacitus records the scene with an almost painful, human intimacy. The once feared Empress was now weeping hysterically, pacing, begging the gods for a reprieve she would never receive. Lepida, now reconciled to her daughter in these final, desperate moments, urged her to meet death with the dignity of a Roman noblewoman. Do not wait for them to come, her mother said softly. Take control of what remains of your life. But Messalina could not. The woman who had ruled the vast empire could not even rule her own hand. When the soldiers arrived, the tribune in charge stood silently, unwilling to touch the Empress. The centurion stepped forward and handed her a dagger. Her fingers trembled. Tears streamed down her face. Finally, her mother took her hand, pressed the blade against her throat, and guided it forward. Thus died Valeria, Messalina, Empress of Rome, at the age of 28, back in Ostia. Claudius received the news during dinner. The messenger whispered the outcome in his ear. The emperor paused, asked calmly for more wine, and finished his meal. He never spoke her name again. In Tacitus's famous words, he neither praised her nor condemned her. It was as if she had never existed. Narrator, and yet, she did exist. And her story, written by men who both feared and despised her, became one of the most infamous in all of Roman history. The centuries would turn her into a powerful myth, the Empress of Lust, the Roman Jezebel. But beneath the salacious scandal lies something more tragic and profoundly human. Messalina was not the first person to be utterly consumed by power, nor the last to mistake absolute indulgence for freedom. Was she a monster or a victim of a system that granted women power only through their allure, and then brutally punished them for daring to use it? She was both. She was a creature of her time and a victim of her own excess. Rome, for all its splendor and laws, was already rotting from within. The empire that conquered the world could no longer conquer its own appetite. Its leaders grew soft with luxury, blind with pride, and hopelessly addicted to spectacle. Messalina was not the disease of Rome. She was a terrible, beautiful symptom of that disease. Narrator. Her story echoes through the centuries because its central warning never truly fades. Every age has its Messalinas, those who mistake indulgence for fulfillment, who test the limits of morality, not out of true evil, but out of a deep, cavernous emptiness. Power without purpose becomes poison. Pleasure without restraint becomes its own brutal punishment. In the flicker of oil lamps, in the ruins of the Palatine, her name still lingers. Messalina, the woman who turned sex into sport, love into a weapon of politics, and power into her own spectacular destruction. They said she competed with a courtesan and won, but the truth is, she lost far more than the world will ever truly know, because at the dark heart of her story lies a final, chilling warning that even in the greatest empire on earth, the most dangerous enemy is not ambition, not lust, not even betrayal. It is profound, unyielding boredom, and boredom, when wedded to absolute, unchallenged power, is a force that can, and will, bring down worlds. She began the night as an empress disguised as a courtesan. She ended her life as an empress, forced to admit her failure. And in that terrifying transformation, Rome saw its own inevitable reflection fade out.